say that more than 90% of the population remains susceptible to coronavirus. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Redfield misstated something there. And
so he misstated last time and
I'm going to answer your question if you let me finish. The data on susceptible that he was talking about was his surveillance data that showed that roughly 9% of the country has antibodies. But when you look at the CDC data state by state, much of that data is old.
Who are we to believe?
You're supposed to believe the science, and I'm telling you the science.
So he's not telling us science.
I'm telling you the science, and that's the answer. And if you want to look up all the data, you're free to.
Americans are looking for the best information right now.
Yeah, and I'm giving you the best information.
That was a perfect exchange. White House COVID advisor Dr. Scott Atlas joins me now. Dr. Atlas, thanks for joining us tonight. Why was it so important to correct that reporter's line of questioning?
Well, thanks for having me, Laura. You know, it's very difficult these days. Honestly, I just want to say I empathize with the American people who have been told conflicting information from a variety of sources, some of whom should know all the facts, but not everybody knows the data. Not everyone's hands-on with reading the data, and the media has done a poor job at explaining, you know, allowing the data to be brought forward. Having said that, you know, the facts are that people like me are reading as much as we can. We're trying to do the best we can because the truth is critical here. We're in a pandemic, and it's a bit of tragedy, and 200,000 people have died. On the other hand, the truth has, you know, the facts have evolved since this started. This is not March. We know a lot about this disease. We know who to protect. We know who has high risk, and we know who does not have high risk. And when you get facts that are sort of partial truths, I think it's very damaging. The American people are very afraid. No one wants to be afraid, and the way to calm fear is to actually know the data and explain it very clearly and logically.
And Dr. Atlas, I know you referenced this in this exchange, but there are other types of immunity that we have, we humans have, and one of them is T-cell immunity, which could protect against this coronavirus. Could you explain that very quickly for us so people understand that we don't currently test for T-cell immunity, but a lot of my medicine cabinet thinks we should be, because that would allay a lot of fears?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's basically two broad categories of immunity. One has to do with B cells, and that's antibodies, and the other is T cells, and that is actually an immunity that lasts longer. And it turns out that antibody tests are done, and we see how many people have antibodies, but antibodies are transient. They only last for months, usually. And what we see here is that we make an assessment of how many people have been exposed by doing this this test for antibodies, but it turns out the literature has shown that there is a lot more than that population that is actually resistant to the infection because of either T-cell response from this infection or a T-cell immunity from a related similar virus. And this is very important because the statement that 90% of people are still susceptible would make me afraid if I was one of those 90%, but it's actually untrue. And when you look at all the data, whether it's from Sweden or Singapore or La Jolla or University of Washington, all over the country, and now we see it from Japan, where the most of the immunity for this virus is felt to be due to T-cell immunity, and it explains a lot. It explains a lot about perhaps why children have very, very low risk from this. It explains perhaps why people in Asia didn't have as much of a problem because they had prior coronavirus exposure.
Bingo.
It really is a story that's evolving here.
Yeah.
But we need to understand it because we are not all susceptible to the infection, and we know now it looks very likely that at least 3 times that number of people with antibodies on testing, have immunity, and perhaps even more. It depends when you do the antibody test, for instance, because I said it's transient. So
exactly.
Even the CDC, if I can say,
yeah.
Go ahead, Laura.
Now, we just have to move along. I want to put this up. We talked about it briefly last night, but this full screen that I'm about to put up is very important because you're right. There's still a lot of people who are afraid out there. Here are the survival rates for different age groups, the best estimates at present. These are government numbers. So from ages 0 to 19, the survival rate, if you get the infection, is 99.997%. Ages 20 to 49, 99.98%. 50 to 69, it's 99.5%. Even if you're over 70 or older, the survival rate is 94.6%. This is not to say it's still not a horrible tragedy. It is. And how many people died? It is a horrible tragedy. But those statistics, do they not indicate, Dr. Atlas, that schools should be open, sports should be played, and we've got to get back to normal life here? And people just don't even know these stats.
Yes, and I know, and this is a failure, in my view, of the public health officials who have not come forward with all the knowledge that we have, like I said, that we've learned. The disease is very, very low risk for children. It's extremely low risk, other than those few children that have some sort of an underlying condition. It's low risk for young adults, like college students, extremely low risk. And this data is known, it's proven all over the world, and I really hope Americans take the time to listen to some of these epidemiologists from Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. These are some of the best epidemiologists in the world. The data is out there, and we don't all have to be paralyzed with fear. We have to do very, very diligent protection of the people who are vulnerable, and those are usually older people with other comorbidities, and we need to open because we know the harms of not opening.
Dr. Atlas, thank you so much for your service to this country and for your perspective. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate that, Laura. Thank you.